On this episode of the Pigskin Cafe, we're going to be talking a little Alabama spring practice. In case you didn't know, it's been going on for a couple weeks, but the tension has been on the Tide basketball team. But today I got my good buddy Thomas Watts from BAMS Radio to break it all down. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Pigskin Cafe, a podcast where Hampton, Chase, and Graham break down all things college football. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
They have to win this game.
There's a problem. This one's tough.
We are back.
That's what my gut's telling me.
I genuinely could not believe it.
You don't live in the great state of Texas.
All right, big boy. Hold my sweet tea.
What are we doing?
That is a stat there, ladies and gentlemen.
Welcome back into the Pigskin Cafe. It's been a while, but we are back to talk Alabama football spring practice. I got my good buddy Thomas Watts from BAMS Radio joining me tonight to break down the offense, defense, any exciting developments that have happened over the past 3 or 4 weeks. But before we get into that, a few housekeeping items. The last time we came to you was when Ryan Grubb got hired at Alabama as their offensive coordinator. We kind of broke that down, reacted to that, and we've got a few more videos planned for this spring. So tentatively, we've got Jimmy Stein hopefully coming on after this second scrimmage this Friday to kind of break that down as we look ahead to A-Day, and we might have one more episode to kind of break down that A-Day practice after that, and then it'll be a good little hiatus before we get into fall camp and preview the upcoming 2025 season. So I wanted to mention that, and I also wanted to mention if it's your first time listening, subscribe to the channel. It takes literally 1 second. Please do that. Hit that notification bell. Leave us a like on this video. Leave us a comment of what you think, and we'd love to hear from you. Love interacting with all you college football fans. And with that all out of the way, Thomas, let's get into it, brother. Spring practice has been underway for 2 or 3 weeks, and we were talking a little bit pre-show. It's kind of been dead. Like the attention from spring practice has kind of been shifted toward the basketball team, which is a good problem to have because Nate Oates has built Alabama into a perennial powerhouse that is in contention each and every year. 4 out of the past 5 years, been in the Sweet 16, back-to-back Elite Eights. So now we're fully on football with Alabama getting eliminated by Duke. And I want to ask you, Thomas, this time last year we had Keelon in his first spring, whirlwind of a first couple of months. Now he's got a full year under his belt. And I don't know about you, but when I've listened to him talk since the end of last year, there's a different assuredness, there's a different confidence and different way that he carries himself. And we've talked about this before, but I think he fully has a grip on this program now. It is fully his program. He's crafting it and building it into his image. So I want to ask you, in what ways does this spring, in the second year under Keelon feel different than the first spring, other than, of course, him being more comfortable and there being more continuity with both the players and the staff?
Oh, you stole my answer with the comfort and continuity thing. But no, joking aside, you roll the clock back 1 year. Excuse me, Hampton, I apologize. You roll the clock back 1 year, and it was frankly about a 3-month-long scramble drill. Mm-hmm. Michigan wins the national championship. Nick Saban gives them a week to celebrate. Nick Saban retires January 10th of last year. And you saw a whirlwind coaching search. I'm pretty sure what's his name over at Oregon is still getting dinner at Chuck's Fish in Tuscaloosa to this day.
Dan Lanning in the back room.
Yeah, Dan Lanning in the back room of De Palma's is coming to coach the University of Alabama. Jokes on everybody who said that was a thing, because the number of Nike stock options Dan Lanning has built into his contract is ludicrous, so he is not going anywhere from that program. And frankly, why should he leave when he's got like the richest guy in college sports, not named Larry Ellison, behind him? Mm-hmm. So, but it was that whirlwind that happened, and the thing that got just pounded on in the media over and over and over again: the number of kids that are going to transfer, the number of kids that are going to transfer. Alabama can only take from Washington because of how the transfers work. Oh, but we can take Michigan because Harbaugh went to the Chargers, but that's pretty much it. Well, everybody could call Alabama. And, spring happens, and there was a new sheriff in town. Anybody who's been around the team knows that there's a different media savvy from the Kalen DeBoer-led Alabama Crimson Tide group, and adapting to that from the media side was very different. But there were also compromises that had to be made. The reality is, from the second Kalen DeBoer was hired, Jalen Milroe was QB1. So that was the reality. And that those are the kind of compromises that had to happen. And I believe Parker Brailsford this spring has said, guys have really bought in. It's a lot more bought in. And so I think more than anything, you are just seeing the general evolution of the program. It was a failing that I personally had, and I know other people had, the expectation that winning culture is winning culture is winning culture. And if there's one thing Nick Saban imparted on the Alabama Crimson Tide, it was the winning culture. But the reality is they're different kinds of winning cultures. And you think about large-scale businesses. Amazon is very, very well known for quantifying everything. You should be, you are doing this well. You are getting a 90 out of 100. Because you had a 90 out of 100, you get a 10% bonus. If you get a 75 out of 100, you get fired. Whereas other companies are more, you might get a 90 out of 100, but we're going to bump you because softy, touchy, feely things. So we're going to not do that. Or you might have a 75, but we're going to bump you because we like you. That kind of situation. And I think Nick Saban was very much the Amazon in this metaphor, and Kalen DeBoer is not. Now, that doesn't mean it's bad. It's just different. And adapting to that difference took more time than a lot of college football fans, myself included, were really willing to give. Now, that said, after we're done yelling at clouds because Oklahoma's still probably running that stupid veer around the left side, the team has evolved. Time has passed. And if you take what is being said in very limited viewability, or interviews at face value, it's better. Again, you have to take it at face value. People are buying in. You're seeing this team coalesce. And that's all, as far as I'm concerned, last year is last year. Dude, I agree with everything that happened. No, I'm pretty certain that you and I yelled at each other over and over and over, either in our back text messages, or if you'd come on BAM's radio or our BAM's radio show on Monday, or I'd come on over here, that it wasn't that great. But for all that shouting at clouds, the culture appears to have changed. And we are still talking about a guy that before last year's bad season was 104-12 as a college coach. So he obviously knows what he's doing. And now the proof's in the pudding, and you burned your mulligan this past season. Yeah. But you like to think that the compromises I alluded to keep the roster together so that you're not rolling out there with 50 dudes, those compromises don't have to happen anymore. Courtney Morgan just got a raise. The players have a relationship with the coaching staff. The coaching staff, to, again, hammer the continuity point, is mostly still intact. So
all but one coach.
Exactly, which, I mean, when's the last time that happened for a Nick Saban staff? 2012? 15 years ago almost?
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe. I mean, like, so you have the circumstance where the ingredients appear to be, we said this last year, and we'll say it again this year. The ingredients appear to be working. The proof, though, will be in the final pudding. Do you see the listless Vanderbilt performance? Or do you see the listless Oklahoma performance? Or do you see the listless Capital Reliant, whatever the hell that bowl was, against Michigan? If you don't see,
bowl.
Thank you. But if you don't see that, like, I don't really care if Alabama loses, as long as I'm not watching it and being able to say, they're about to throw deep because of this formation. Oh, they threw deep and it's a touchdown. Or another thing we've talked about, snap the ball properly and execute the play for once. It's the little mistakes that'll drive fans crazy. The the types of games that are back and forth and a play breaks one way or a play breaks the other, while those really stink to go through as a fan, they're also much more defensible than the whooping that Alabama took in Norman this past season.
Yeah.
So I realize that's a very long-winded, talking about drawing a few things, stitching it all together. But just overall, I'm willing to accept that the culture is in place. The players that are there want to be there. They're not, being strong-armed by one or more political parties that are involved in that locker room. And that's a good spot to be in. And here's the thing that really helps that we can talk about some more. I look at this, you look at the few practice reports that come out. I feel like I have to pull up a depth chart or a recruiting class thing because most of Alabama's starters last year are either gone to the NFL, thank you for your service, graduated, thank you for your service, or are hurt, thank you for continuing to play, but you can't really practice right now. So you're seeing these players get recruited to Alabama, and instead of the classic Nick Saban, ride the pine, figure it out for 2 years, have a good third year and go, you have so much youth and so many players that are making a name for themselves early that you have to feel good about the depth and where this stuff might settle in. Because the reality is, if you're going to win a national championship, you're either going to have unbelievable injury luck or unbelievable depth, and probably both. Well, how do you feel about the depth of this team as we've seen it in the spring? We'll just leave the injury luck thing to the side for now.
Yeah. Are you? I didn't know if you were being rhetorical.
I am trying to segue back because I have just talked for 5 minutes, and I'm sure there's a producer or one of your other Pigskin Cafe colleagues being like, "This guy needs to shut his mouth."
Cut it. No, I think, and this, I'm glad you asked this because I was going to go in this direction. Something that is very impressive about this staff. This was their first full recruiting class of them evaluating prospects all over the country. This was the first class of them bringing them on official visits, scouting them, and then ultimately having them commit. And I think the early returns on this class are as good as Alabama has had in quite a long time. And I say that to say that there are many key starters that are out this spring. Caden Proctor being one of them. Deontay Lawson, Damani Jackson, Keon Sab. James Smith. The list can go on and on. Those are key contributors from last year that are going to be vital to the success of the team in 2025. But all you've heard all spring, and again, I'm going to touch on some of these players specifically as we go further in the show, is, this young guy who just showed up, he is making a name for himself out on the practice field. And it's all over the roster. It's at wide receiver. It's at offensive line. It's at linebacker. It's especially at corner. And so what that tells me is that beyond that first and second string on the depth chart, Alabama's got some talent. And I think last year, due to the circumstances that you mentioned with Kalen DeVore and what he had to deal with, a lot of that depth that Alabama had, a lot of the guys that they were going to be really reliant upon in 2024, they left. And so your depth for 2024 got inserted into the starting lineup, and it was kind of a trial by fire. And while at times it burned you in 2024, it's going to pay dividends in 2025. And the reps that these young guys are getting this spring due to injury, I think are building up that depth more and more and more. And I think it's a testament to the job that this staff did in evaluating prospects and bringing guys in. Because let's be honest, and then I'll kick it back to you to kind of get your response, and then we can kind of shift the conversation forward. We love Nick Saban. Nick Saban is the greatest coach of all time. But you and I can both admit, and I think we went through this on our previous show, the classes in 2023, 2022, 2021, 2020, and 2019, you go back and look, definitely there are contributors all throughout. Obviously, Alabama would not have been competing for SEC championships and national championships if there were not some gems in those classes. There were also a ton of misses for one reason or another, whether it be misevaluation, character issues, or so on and so forth. And I think what this staff has shown early on is that even with guys that the recruiting services have not rated as highly, they take a guy like a Lotzeir Brooks, who was not on the radar, a guy like Keelon Russell, who wasn't on the national radar. They identified him early, got him to commit, and then you saw where they rose to, and you saw the impact that they are already making in Tuscaloosa.
You're absolutely right. And that's to me, I think, put it to you this way, Hampton, the way that you see an NCAA basketball team currently being constructed, a couple of homegrown guys, a couple of transfers, and go out and play ball, is going to be how every major, football and basketball are going to essentially follow the same pattern. Now, I realize one roster is, 85 right now, and one is 13 or 15, whatever the heck it is. It doesn't really matter. But, what Alabama desperately needed, and we saw it this past season, because there were some times where, whether it was defense struggling in a couple of points or offense struggling in a couple of points for a variety of reasons that we don't need to re-adjudicate.
No.
It's a talent infusion. It was just simply a talent infusion. It was a backfill such that you can keep the engine going. And I agree with you. This recruiting staff is superb. And we said this when Ryan Grubb came back to Alabama, but when Kalen DeBoer built his first staff before Ryan Grubb went to the Seahawks, Josh Pate rated it as like a top 5 staff nationally. Well, I think that's borne out. And, even now without Grubb, it did take a step back, and even Pate would admit that. But I think we've seen it borne out, and the backfill is important because the other part is, you're not going to get a player, Marlon Humphrey straight up said it. I wouldn't have been there. I wouldn't. Nope.
I love Marlon, but my gosh, what an awful tweet at the worst time.
Right, but see, as awful as it is, it's also illustrative of the general consensus around football.
It's the reality. Yeah.
I mean, this kind of to sound like a broken record. We can scream at clouds all we want, but that's the reality here. So getting these kids, getting them some publicity, maybe they don't get an NIL deal to the tune of Dr. Pepper or whatever the heck, but maybe they get a Sonny's barbecue, hey, free barbecue once a week or some nonsense like that.
I take that.
Oh God, yes. But but the point is, it gets them into the system. It gets them, this is college football. This is what it takes. You're doing a good job. We like you here. And that to me is how you're going to have to build a roster. And, I'm not saying it's a good thing that Alabama has the number of injuries that they have right now, because it isn't. But at the same time, it's not universally bad. And going back to my staff point, that's where you'll see dividends later in the year. Yeah. And, again, talk about having to play 15, 16, 17 games. Ohio State wasn't Ohio State until after that Oregon game. Now, they were world beaters after that. But, that team, fantastic football team last year, that team took a little bit of baking time to fold in a Caleb Downs, something like that. Well, the baking time is going to happen all over the country. If you can accelerate that such that, Alabama, to again, continue to extend the baking metaphor to a painful point, if Alabama can be done and out of the oven baked by Georgia versus by Tennessee, that's you're talking potentially 2 games that you could win or lose. And, that's a big deal. So I think the youth movement while unfortunate that you don't have everybody that you're going to see running the top tier of Kane Womack's defense or even the offensive line, it's only good for Alabama in the long run. And really, to me, the spring has morphed from a chance for fans to get excited about a guy like TJ Yeldon, who had a great A-Day that first go-around, to trying to put in longer-term investments. It's a fundamental shift in spring, which, frankly, I'm not sure I like. But, again, if I yell at clouds all day, I'm still just yelling at clouds. So talking about youth, though, I'm going to kick this one to you. Again, the producer's yelling at me. I think it's the dog that you can see over my shoulder. Talking about youth, talking about folks getting reps. On offense, who's your guy or who's your guys that jump out to you as having a really good spring based on the practice reports you've read or the conversations you've had?
Yeah. Before I get to that, I want to put a fine point on the segment that we were just kind of having. I think also the biggest difference, we talked about the youth movement. We talked about DeBoer being more comfortable in his skin. But I think more than anything, and again, at this point in the year, if you ask a player a question, where they're going to say everything sucks, everything's terrible, they're going to tell you the right things. That's what they've been trained and coached to do.
Right.
But the recurring theme of accountability and discipline being more of a priority for this staff, I think shows and validates what Josh Pate said last year in the spring and even before fall camp, that this staff, due to the circumstances, had to handle spring differently. They had to handle it more with kid gloves, so you couldn't kick anybody off and then leave.
Mm-hmm.
I think this year there's a little bit of a change of approach in that, and I think Alabama will be the better for it. To answer your question and kind of move the show forward.
Sure.
I'll let you talk about quarterbacks, and I'll piggyback off that. I think the biggest change or the biggest thing to me that has stood out in this spring is the total overhaul and evolution of the wide receiver room. I think what Jamarcus Shepard has done with that room is very akin to what Mo Linguist has done with the cornerback room. Because there have been many people who have said that DeBoer and Shepard, Sheridan last year, when they came in, they were kind of shocked and surprised by the lack of talent in the receiving room. I don't think they were nearly as high on some of the guys like a Kobe Prentice, like a Kendrick Law, than many of us fans were. And granted, they were just coming off of a room with Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, all who are at least top three picks in the draft as far as rounds go. They all got drafted in the first 3 rounds of the draft. And then their fourth guy, Jeremy Bernard, came over and was the number 2 for Alabama last year. So instead of just having Ryan and Jeremy as Batman and Robin, and then the rest of the guys in the room were like Alfred, you've got a full Justice League this year in that wide receiver room. Because I think Isaiah Horton from Miami, Isaiah Horton from Miami, the transfer, I think he has been a revelation this spring. I've heard really, really good things about him. Apparently had a huge scrimmage last week, catching 2 or 3 touchdowns from Ty Simpson. You've got Jalen Hale coming back, who I thought flashed a lot in 2023, but his season was cut short by injury. You've got a guy like Cole Adams, who's a reliable, steady, dependent wide receiver. Then you've got the influx of talent with Lotzeir Brooks, who, practice 2 or 3 of spring, you were hearing about his playmaking ability, how dynamic he was with the ball in his hands. Kalen DeBoer even said, you would think a guy of his stature would be a demon in the slot. And while that is very true, he said he is actually very good at going down the field vertically, getting open, and winning at the catch point. All right, who else was good at that? The same guy that wore the number that he's wearing, Jalen Waddle. I'm not making a comparison than saying Lotzeir Brooks is going to be Jalen Waddle. Don't flip that and say that the Pigskin Cafe said that. But they have very similar skill sets, and I've heard a lot of great things about him. Derek Meadows is a guy who I don't know if you're going to see a lot of him this year, but he's a very tall, very athletic guy, 6'5", 6'6". So that whole room, and I'm forgetting about, Rico Scott has had a huge spring, who really, I thought he flashed in the bowl game as a guy like, there's something there with this kid. Jalen Mbakwe, who
well, Rico Scott, to jump in, I'm sorry. Rico Scott probably had the best touchdown catch of the year on that play that from Austin Mack against the Cupcake. That might have been the best catch of the year. Well, okay, minus the Georgia thing by Ryan Williams. That's in its own zip code. But if you take that one out, yeah, exactly. But go ahead.
It's up there. And they use him as kind of a ball carrier against Michigan, and he was one of the few that were generating explosive plays in that game, because of that game was an unmitigated disaster on offense, and that wasn't the first time that we said that last year. But I digress. I will say this, and I don't want to get off on a whole long tangent. I just kind of want to throw this out there, and I'm kind of like uncorking the grenade and throwing it out. Was Jalen Mbakwe kind of dumb to move to receiver? Because I honestly do not see how he's going to fit into this rotation with things that I've heard, and with you've already got a clear three of Ryan Williams, Jeremy Bernard, and Isaiah Horton. And then you've got all these other guys that have made a ton of plays all throughout spring. I haven't heard much on Mbakwe, but I'll let you deal with that here in a minute. But I think that room is the biggest story of spring, because I think there's so much versatility from a skill set perspective, but also a size perspective. Because Isaiah Horton, Derek Meadows, they add true length to that room that it was desperately needing. And I just think they're going to be able to move guys around, play Ryan Williams in the slot a little bit more, and add, kind of even more of opportunities to get mismatches and get favorable matchups. Get Ryan Williams matched up with a safety or even a linebacker like Tuff Borland versus Devontae Smith 2020 style. I just think the multiplicity in that room is going to be vital and make this offense even more explosive than it was last year.
I think you're right, and I see the grenade that's landed there. Let's just put a box around it, because I'm going to toss it right back to you later in the show. Just right. Don't worry. But you're absolutely right in that it's going to be waves of guys. It's going to be waves of guys doing specialized roles, but it also is going to be just frankly, all over the place. I don't mean all over the place bad. I mean, you're not just going to be able to pigeonhole a guy, at least based on, again, early practice reports. And I'll do the offense thing, because I got the easy one here. You basically, put alley-oop to me. You got to look at the quarterbacks. I'm sorry. What did we say about Kalen DeBoer's offense? Kalen DeBoer's offense is one that loves to exploit space, wants to take a window and exploit it to the nth degree. And why was the Washington offense so successful? Because, one, they had really good wide receivers, no doubt. You listed them just now. But Michael Penix, as the trigger man, could throw any ball that you needed.
Yep.
And he was able to do it consistently and do it well. What was the downside with Jalen Milroe? Jalen Milroe short, anything behind the line of scrimmage, it would be perfect or it would be horrid, and there would be no in between.
No in between, yeah.
You and I were memeing to each other when a slant would be completed. Like, we were just like, if you put it to you this way, you would be stone cold sober if you took a shot for every slant that Alabama completed last year. You would not. You would just be like, oh, this is a day that ends in Y. I don't care. Well, a space-based offense wants to take advantage of that. They want to take advantage of every part of the field, and you've got to be able to read it. Now, I don't want to beat Jalen Milroe up any more than I already have, but if there's one spot that you have to hope with a Ty Simpson or an Austin Mack or a Keelon Russell. And the quarterback battle is still on, but I would be willing to bet if Alabama played Florida State tomorrow, Ty Simpson's QB1. Put it to you that way.
100%.
The idea being that Ty Simpson is going to be able to complete some more of the space-based throws, not just bombs, but, setting up an easy layers concept or, a flare screen. And for your listeners, and I'll go deep into this one, and then we can kick over to defense. The thing about anything behind the line of scrimmage is you are trading time for space, because you are hoping that you can get the ball out quick enough in enough space for you to gain positive yards. Astonishing. That's what offense is. Well, in order to do that, you really need to lead the wide receiver so that they're already running up the field. That's how you maximize yardage. If you throw it behind them and they have to adjust, probably a tackle for loss. So, that was one of the struggles this past year. It also took away one of the strengths, Jam Miller wheel route. Make that a T-shirt, because it constantly worked. So, being able to do all of those things more effectively empowers Kalen DeBoer's offense. Now, the positive for a Ty Simpson, or again, I'll just talk about Ty Simpson as an overarching thing, because I think all three quarterbacks have strong passing traits.
Yeah.
The thing about that is this is where the wide receivers matter, because not every pass is going to be perfect, but if more of them are close to perfect, the offense picks up that extra third down. That offense picks up that instead of 3rd and 8, it's 3rd and 2. And so what do you do against an offense that's going to throw a Jeremy Bernard, who would be wide receiver 1 at a lot of schools, if not for Ryan Williams? Ryan Williams coming out there, and we don't need to go back over the roster again, but and then you can hit with Richard Young or Jam Miller. So it really creates a lot of problems, because you're more efficient by design, or you're able to be more efficient. Now, explosiveness, not really sure, but Alabama's explosiveness numbers fell off a cliff once there was a lot of tape out on what Alabama wanted to do. Yeah. But, you can win a national championship being very efficient. For heaven's sake, Georgia did it for 2 years in a row. Like, they weren't bombing away. They were efficiently just chewing up clock moving down the field. Now, that doesn't mean that Brock Bowers wouldn't go Godzilla on somebody. But
or McCarthy.
Yeah, exactly. But that's what I want to see from the quarterbacks. And, one other side of this, talking about the culture point we spoke about earlier, it's been reported that Ty Simpson's on the leadership council. Now, you can certainly say, and you can certainly argue, and you would be wrong, that coaches push Ty onto the leadership council. It's a player-elected thing. The locker room said, you quarterback, you are on the leadership council because you know what the hell you're doing, and we respect what you have to say. Now, that doesn't mean that he's going to go win the Heisman. It doesn't even mean he's going to be QB1. But that underscores my point earlier that if Alabama played Florida State tomorrow, he's the guy. And frankly, Hampton, I'm going to kick it back to you to close out this and move us on.
Yeah.
Track shoes? Have you told your listeners about track shoes? Because you need to tell listeners about
track
shoes. I don't
think I have.
You no. This is your story. I might have started it, but you get to tell this story as the segue.
I'm finishing it.
Yep.
So Thomas and I have had a running bit for 2 years now? I think 2 years now about we've always been higher on Ty Simpson than the average Alabama fan. And, I've gotten told by many friends, I've gotten told by many BOL poster, many Twitter user that Ty Simpson sucks because he couldn't beat Jalen Milroe out. Ty Simpson is trash, yada, 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 yada. And I'm just telling everybody, with the way things are trending, and again, everything can change, Thomas and I are going to put our track shoes on and have many a victory lap this fall if Ty Simpson goes out and balls out like I think he's going to. So that is the track shoes reference. So you've gotten a peek inside the curtain into one of our infamous and most long-running inside joke. I'm going to put a point on the quarterback, and then we'll move to defense.
Sure.
Talk about that quickly, and then get out of here. But I think the point that you made about not only Ty, and I mainly want to talk about Ty because I do think all indications are that he is QB1 as of right now, as of April 1st, 2025, and no, it is not April Fool's that I'm saying that. Let me put that disclaimer out there. But with a strong scrimmage performance, with Kalen DeBoer saying last week, they asked him about the quarterback competition right after the scrimmage, and he said, I don't think much has changed since the beginning of spring. Okay, what was the beginning of spring was Ty Simpson number 1, Austin Mack number 2, and Keelon Russell number 3. I think that order is still the same. I think the real battle is Austin Mack versus Keelon Russell for QB2. That's what I think more of the battle is right now. Again, I don't know that for a fact, but kind of putting the puzzle pieces together, that's what I think. You mentioned Ty getting elected to the Leadership Council. That is huge. That is a player-led decision, like you said, and I think that shows the respect that he has garnered amongst his teammates. And then on top of that, he got invited to go to the Manning Passing Academy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's much to do about nothing. I think that can be seen with some importance. But regardless of who the quarterback is, all three of these guys had the skill set to be able to distribute the ball in a way that, and again, I'm not bashing Jalen Milroe. I've done that enough in a constructive way that is going to open up so many more opportunities for this Alabama offense, because RPOs have not been like traditional RPOs, like what Tua ran and what Bryce ran, have been non-existent. Bubble screens in this offense have been pretty much non-existent. Slants and in-breaking routes over the middle have been pretty much non-existent. That does not mean, do not go in the comments and tell me lovingly, well, Jalen Milroe completed a pass against Arkansas in 2023 with 4 minutes left to go in the fourth quarter. I'm not saying that he never did it. He absolutely did. The problem was consistency, and I think a big problem was the pre-snap reads. We talked about that a lot. Well, I've heard from reading pieces from other people, that has been a strength for Ty Simpson. His pre-snap processing and his pre-snap plan, winning before the ball is hiked. I think that more than anything has been something that Alabama has been missing. And if you can win like that, I am not comparing Ty Simpson to Tua. I am just saying that is how Tua and Bryce won a lot, was before the snap, knowing where to go with the ball based on what the defense was showing. I think having all of those tools, and I compare it to a pitcher in baseball, I feel like last year and in 2023, Alabama had a fastball, and if you got a beat on that fastball as a defense, we didn't have a curve, a slider, or a changeup to throw at you. This year, I think a guy like Ty Simpson or Austin Mack or Keelon Russell, but specifically Ty, you're going to be able to do so much more on offense, which is going to make you very difficult to defend. And then we're talking about the skill players that Alabama has at its disposal. I think it's something that Alabama fans can get really, really excited about. I'm excited to kind of see, we got scrimmage number 2 coming up on Friday. I think there might be, some more eyes on this one than maybe the first one. Let's see what comes out of that and kind of go from there as far as the quarterbacks go. Thomas, I'm going to give you my brief, big takeaway on defense, and I'm going to keep it really quick.
Sure.
Because we touched on this a little bit at the beginning. And then if you have anything else to say on the quarterbacks, go for it. But if not, you can respond to my defensive point and then share yours, and then we can get out of here for the night. But the perceived weakness coming into 2024 on the Alabama defense is now, I think, the strength of the 2025 defense. and that is the secondary.
Mm-hmm.
Last year we talked about there were so many key contributors, whether it be the draft and Terrion Arnold, Kool-Aid McKinstry, that left, and a guy like Caleb Downs and Trey Amos, who entered the portal and would have been key players for Alabama in 2024, they left. So you had an infusion of a transfer in Keon Sabb, transfer in Damani Jackson, then Xavier Brown and some younger guys like a Red Morgan who filled in early in the year, and then a guy like Bray Hubbard who had not played up until that point filled in. This year, I think you got arguably a top 5 duo at corner in the country in Xavier Brown and Damani Jackson. I think Bray Hubbard and Keon Sabb are going to be one heck of a safety duo. I'm not going to go top 5 for them because I will say I don't think it's a coincidence that Alabama's defense started playing infinite. They had already started to peak a little bit and play better before Bray Hubbard got inserted to the lineup, but I think his playmaking ability, his nose for the football, and his headiness of always being where he's supposed to be really helped the defense out. But I think him and Keon Sabb are going to be a heck of a duo. And then you had the luxury of having a transfer in Cameron Calhoun come in. He's apparently turned a lot of heads. He's a longer corner. But then Dijon Lee's been the talk of spring practice. I mean, Ken Womack has talked him up. Ryan Williams has talked him up. Kalen DeBoer has. And I think what you might see, I wouldn't be shocked that at some point during the year, you have all three of Dijon Lee at 6'4", and Xavier Brown and Damani Jackson all on the field at the same time. Maybe you can shift Xavier to Husky a little bit and kind of play him in that role in certain situations. I think the options at that position and the talent, the way that Mo Linguist has remade that room, similar to, like I said, Jamarcus Shepard has remade the wide receiver room, is going to pay dividends for that defense, because when you have a lockdown secondary like I think Alabama is going to have, that allows you to be able to blitz more. It allows you to be able to be a little bit more aggressive in what you call, and you're going to be able to trust those guys on islands, and I think you saw more of that as the season went on. So to me, Dijon Lee and that secondary have been the biggest storyline coming out of spring practice on defense, Thomas.
So, you remember that grenade that I put under a box and said I was going to throw back?
Yeah, it's time in it.
That's why Jalen Mbakwe may have thought going to wide receiver is better for him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Mbakwe, to his credit, I didn't think he played bad last year. But
no, we praised him all throughout the year
right.
at how well he played, especially considering he didn't play corner in high school.
Right. So I'm not willing to say that it was a bad choice. It's almost like Jalen Mbakwe made what he felt was the best of several not great choices in terms of playing time. Now, I might be overstating that case. I don't really know, but that's the grenade launched back. Now, I think your secondary take is accurate. I think one of the things that will be interesting to me is replacements. Tim Smith's gone, and getting a defensive line rotation in, getting those guys. What was the guy that made waves early? Stephen Buamua.
Yeah,
his development could be a big deal. Is he there yet? No, but Alabama. If there's one thing that the Alabama defense has lacked, and there's a reason for this, which we can talk about, if the one thing the Alabama defense has lacked is that guy since basically Quinnen Williams, that you could just know you can put him over an offensive guard and it is game over. Like, he is going to do whatever it is he's going to do. And I'm just going to leave that as open-ended as possible because, defensive tackles do a variety of moves, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But Alabama hasn't had that Ashawn Robinson, Quinnen Williams guy that can do a variety of things. Now, is there a guy there that can do that for Alabama this year? I don't know. I think so. Well, again, Hampton, maybe, but
Yeah, it's projecting for sure.
Yeah. But you're sitting here and that's what I always look for, because no matter what you want to say about college football, whether it's bad that kids are being paid, or it's bad that you can buy a team, or it's whatever. That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter a hill of beans. It's still the SEC, and in a large part the Big Ten, and you are insane if you think the Big Ten and the SEC are not about to have an absolute stranglehold in the national championship. Like it's like if you gave me for the next 10 years the entirety of the Big Ten and the SEC versus the field, like give me those current teams, assuming conferences stay the same, I'm taking the SEC and the Big Ten, and it's not even close. Like
No.
it's absurd how much money I would throw at that bet. So in either case, it's still a line of scrimmage league. Why was Georgia so effective? Why did they win back-to-back national titles? Because they were throwing dudes out there like Alabama was in the 2015 to 2017 run. You had offensive line groups that were spectacularly good. But, then why did Alabama win both SEC championships that they played against Georgia? Georgia couldn't do that. They couldn't do that in either case. Now, for a variety of reasons, Amarius Mims gets hurt a couple years back, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not saying that it's a direct one-to-one.
Yeah.
But that's what I've wanted to see. And, if Mbuamua can get the coaching he needs, get a rotational piece, keep, and to use a video game term, keep leveling up that defensive line group. And I didn't think the defensive line was that bad last year. I mean, good Lord, I think LT Overton had the most pressures for a defensive end in college football or something like that.
Close to it, yeah.
And so if you can, and think about it, let's say he only converts 5 of those pressures into sacks. Well, sacks are disproportionately drive killers, even with all the offensive talent in the SEC and even in the Big Ten. They're disproportionately drive killers. So a little bit better defensive line play, that's what I want to see. And that's what I always harp on, because, again, if you can't win on the line of scrimmage, you're going to run into a crew that does. And when you do, you are in all kinds of trouble. And you only need to look at last year. Where was Ohio State dominant? The defensive line.
Yep.
Like, their defensive line was so good it covered for a MASH unit, Ohio State offensive line. Where did Notre Dame experience a drop-off? Well, half their daggum first-team defensive line blew their knees out over like a 3 or 4 game span. Now, Notre Dame was still a wonderful defense. I take nothing away from those guys. But, if you can get those 3 or 4 guys that are just insane disruptors and they stay healthy and they can win and they can punch an offense in the mouth, you've got to have spectacularly good skill players to really be effective. Now, luckily, Ohio State has this fellow named Jeremiah Smith, so, that happens, and this other guy named Travion Henderson at the time. But the point is, that's where, you have to feel pretty confident, and I apologize, the dog just came in, so he might start talking. But, that's what I want to see. That's where I think Alabama could grow. And to dovetail all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, that's where the evaluations are really going to matter, because there is a specific defensive line problem in college football right now. And it's that to get a 5-star defensive lineman, the going rate is like $1.5 million, $2 million a year. Alabama doesn't have that.
And there's not enough of them.
There are not enough of them. The market is so tight that you're going to struggle to get a lot of those. So if you can take a 4-star and get them to near that 5-star level, big deal. So that's what I think. That's where I think you're going to see a lot of growth. I know that a mutual friend of ours, not going to name names, is not a Freddie Roach fan. Fair enough.
That's putting it mildly.
Well, I've already made one joke where you just did the face palm, so I'm not going to go anymore. I got my one in for the next 6 months. I'm not going to get invited back on the show. I can feel it. But no, again, joking aside, that's what you're after when you're looking in the spring. Who's flashing there? And before folks, I'll leave you with this, Hampton, and kick it back to you. A lot of times folks are freaking out because the defense is ahead of the offense. They should be.
Mhm.
Offensive line is currently, they're currently in a cycle. It's a mash unit, and they're currently they're not in true game shape. They're just not. They don't need to be. That's not how like human body works, whether it should or not. So I think it's okay. The defense is ahead of the offense. And again, as much as we rave about a Ty Simpson and the wide receiver room and all the other crew that we're really excited about, there are a lot of new pieces over there that are going to have to come together.
Yep.
If you tell me right now that the Alabama defense is going to go into Tallahassee, that first game of the year, and hold Florida State to, 3.5, maybe 4 yards a play, or even 4.5 yards a play, I'll take that. That's winning football early in the year. If they get lower into like the 3.75s, Alabama will annihilate Florida State at that pace. It just won't work. So not a bad way to be. I'm really excited about the defensive line prospects, and I'll kick back from Bams. Maybe we'll finally get organic pressure again. Not blitz-based pressure. If Alabama can get that, again, to harp on Ohio State, that was constant from those guys. And that solves an order of magnitude of defensive problems when you can take 4, beat their 5, and get a tackle for a loss or a sack, Hampton. So a lot of exciting on the fronts for me.
Absolutely, man. And I'll end it with this. Talking about organic pressure, a lineup out there, if you get down on third down and you got a guy like James Smith, a guy like Tim Keenan, who is an elite pass rusher, but he's got some power and able to push the pocket a little bit. And then you got LT Overton and a healthy and slimmed down version of Clay Rusall, who I don't think we saw the best version of, because remember, he got hurt game 3.
Right.
And I don't ever think he was quite the same. If you a front 4 of that, I think you're going to be able to do a lot of creative things with stunts and twists and not have to blitz at soul, and combine that with the Alabama secondary that I just spoke of. Some pretty promising prospects for the Tide. And Thomas, it was a heck of a show, man. We got to talk a little ball, break down the offense, break down the defense, and I'll end it with this. Greg McElroy apparently heard today, take it for what it's worth, that Ty Simpson has firm control on Alabama's QB1 spot. Not surprising, but again, further confirmation of kind of things that we're hearing and just reading the tea leaves, putting the puzzle pieces together. But Thomas, thank you again so much for joining me tonight, man. It was great to catch up with you. Always good to talk ball. For anyone out there, like I said at the beginning of the show, if you made it this far, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, follow us on Spotify, follow us on Apple Podcasts, and on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. If you haven't already, hit that notification bell, leave us a like, leave us a comment of what you thought of the video, things that you agreed with, things that you disagreed with. What is your biggest takeaway of spring at Alabama to this point? Like I said, I hope to have Jimmy sign on later this week after scrimmage number 2 to kind of discuss where Alabama goes from here, what we're hearing out of that scrimmage. So be on the lookout for that. But the Pigskin Cafe is going to be closed for now. But until next time, chew on that.